Hello, everybody. My name is Sean Hendricks. For those of you who were in the last session, you already knew that. I'd like to welcome you all to the Maya Dev session of our Expert Challenge. And in this session, what we're going to be doing is looking very specifically at questions about the development of the current release, questions about, the questions you'd like to ask about development in general. Ground rules, of course, as always are, we really aren't allowed to tell you many of the things you want to know. We can't come out and say, X feature will be out at this time, any of that kind of stuff. So feel free to ask those questions. I'm just going to ignore them in the chat window because I know we can't really answer those. There may be some a little on the line that maybe someone can give it a little nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We'll see, but I wouldn't count on anything. So that's what we're going to focus on in this particular session. We're going to show a little bit of the new features, maybe dig a little deeper into some of them just so you get a better idea than what you might have gotten in some of the new feature videos. If you have questions that are more around the how do I do this, how do I get around this, that kind of thing, that's going to be for the tips and tricks session tomorrow. So you'll want to tune back in if we have both a 3ds Max and a Maya tips and tricks session tomorrow where you can get into exactly that kind of stuff. So to start things off, what I'd like to do is just introduce Chris Viano, who is the product manager for all this stuff. He's the one that you can all bitch to first. Start with him. When in doubt, always start with him. And I'm immediately going to roll it downhill to him.
You can end with me.
And it'll end on Daryl at the far end. So we also have Trevor Adams, who's our user experience designer for Maya. He's involved in a lot of the things that you're probably going to ask questions about. So we figured we'd bring him in as well. And we have Michael Todd, who has got a significant amount of experience in the industry working at a number of major feature films and things like that. And one of the most notable things he's been working on in the past is the XGen side of what's been going on in Maya. And then at the far end, we have Daryl O'Bara, who is on my team. He is one of the specialists who creates the new feature videos. So once he starts talking, you'll probably recognize his voice from literally hundreds of videos on YouTube showing stuff in Maya. So with that, we're going to dive in. And what I'm going to do is we've taken a whole bunch of questions ahead of time, so I've got a big long list of stuff people have submitted over the last couple of weeks. And then I'll keep an eye on what's happening in the chat online as well to see if there's any interesting questions we can pull out and address directly. So feel free to start posting in there. What we'll do is why don't we start in immediately and start looking at some of the functionality that's coming in this release of the product. So we had a few questions where people were asking about XGen in particular initially. One of the things that they were asking about was how hard was it to get XGen into Maya from, because obviously for those of you who don't know, XGen was originally a Disney product, internal code, not necessarily designed for the outside world. So people were asking how hard was it to do and what does it look like compared to kind of what was originally there?
Well, XGen was designed at Disney, written at Disney, and it was developed as a hardcore TD tool for doing instancing, which is hair and fur and vegetation and anything where they needed thousands of things across the surface. They would use XGen, but it was designed with very hardcore TDs in mind, and so everything was, you'd have to create an expression to do anything. You'd have to write an expression. And one of the things we did when we got XGen into Maya, we did a usability study, and we put people in front of it with little experience with Maya, but not experts. They definitely weren't hardcore TDs. And we told them what XGen was capable of doing and what we would use it for. And we asked them to actually do something with XGen and see what happened. And I think one guy, he persevered for about 17 minutes, and he actually managed to get something on a surface, and that was a little victory. But there was there's two of the guys. They just gave up after 5 minutes. They just couldn't figure it out. They knew what they were trying to do, but they couldn't figure it out from the interface because it just wasn't very clear. And so one of the things we've done in XGen is to really try and make it much more accessible for first-time users. So it actually gives you hints and tips about what you're going to be doing and what the different description types are as you are making the selections when you're creating a new description. It tells you what you're going to need to do and why something might not be appearing because you don't have any guide to say, so it gives up a little heads-up display on that. And that's the kind of thing we've been adding into it to make it so people can actually do something with it rather than have it sit there and not get any results. And we're just making it so you can actually load files, because before you'd have to type in an expression and you'd have to know the file path to that map rather than just browse to that file.
It was super easy.
Yeah, it was super easy.
So I see Daryl's clicking over there. Daryl, do you have something up at the moment, or?
I did actually. I just pulled up one of the files that we use for the new feature videos. This is a Sven character, and one of the things. We do have some pretty awesome photos. We do have some pretty amazing photographs of Chris in the Sven suit. They 3D printed. I don't know. Maybe we can pull one of those up later, and we'll get to that at the end of the presentation. So now we have the ability to just take standard Maya shaders and assign them to it, which is pretty exciting. Something that we didn't show in the new feature video. So for this example, what we're going to do is we're just going to grab a new shading material inside of Maya. Obviously, one that's a little bit better for doing hair. If we double click on that guy and just kind of crank that up so it's a little bit more apparent, you can see that as soon as we assign that material to that hair object, we now get those really nice sort of non-round highlights. So we're getting that sort of nice striped highlight to that. So that's something that was added actually after the first drop of XGen, which was in the extension release. This was new in 2015. So we're just continuing to make it a bit more integrated. You can even do things now like put ramps on this. So if I put a ramp and going down the length of this, you'll see that it's going to basically be tied to, let's see, it didn't grab that ramp, did it? I did a file. Let's undo that and do a ramp. So the ramp widget actually got changed in 2015 too, which is actually really nice. It makes a little bit more sense. We're being a little bit more, we're using the space that used to take the old ramp vertically and putting it horizontally. It just gives you a lot of more control over that ramp directly. So you can see that we're basically tying that ramp down that new shading model from root to tip. So little things like that just make it more accessible for the general Maya user. It makes it feel a little bit more complete as far as a Maya user is concerned.
And that's what my hair would look like if I didn't dye it.
There you go. See, that's what I figured.
So another thing that that was important when we took the technology over was it was only on Linux.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of code that was just kind of built in production. So a lot of the work that we had to do was be able to make it run on all the platforms that we support, all the graphics cards that we support. Again, the analogy that we use, and we've put in a lot of production tech into Maya, is that this is code made for hundreds of people, not hundreds of thousands of people. So a lot of the work that we would do in stuff like this is trying to get this technology available to the hundreds of thousands of people that use Maya.
You can continue holding that. I already have my mic. So I had a question from the outside come in here, and again, this is one that we can't really answer, but maybe there's something we can talk about here. Is from Steve Sayer. Classic particles interpolate between cached frames, which makes them easy to resample for blur. End particles don't do this, which has caused us endless headaches. Is there any plan to implement this? So I'm pretty sure we can't say whether there's a plan to implement this, but does anyone have any thoughts around that functionality? And we all look to Daryl.
There's been lots of work with particles. There's continuing work on particles inside of Maya and effects in general. It's obviously been a big push for this release with the support for particles in Viewport 2, Bifrost. There's lots of things where you can see that we're taking effects seriously inside of Maya again, which I think is a great thing for the mass user base of Maya artists out there. I love it as an artist. I'm psyched.
So not for 2015 is the answer.
Exactly.
I think that's the
It's not there
Yeah,
now. Yes.
exactly. Not for 2015.
All right, so let's go on to another question here. One of the questions I've got here is describe how what Open Subdiv is and how it is different from what Disney has been, Disney and Pixar and those guys have been doing with it.
Yeah, so Open Subdiv, that's a great question. Open Subdiv is something that's new to Maya 2015. It's actually our default subdivision algorithm that we're using. So, for example, if you open Maya, create a cube, hit 3, then you're using Open Subdiv to smooth that mesh. So Open Subdiv, what is it? It's essentially the recipe that Pixar has been using for ages to subdivide meshes. And they've opened that up to the public, and they wanted people to come in on that, people being third-party vendors like ourselves, to rally behind them and say this is the way to do subdivision in all applications, so that we build a standard. So they're opening the doors up to that, so that we build that standard together. In Autodesk, specifically Maya, we wanted to jump at the forefront of that and deliver that as soon as possible. because the opportunity is there. So, previously with Maya, we have smooth mesh preview. Like I said, you just hit 3 and you've got a smooth mesh preview of your geometry. And that was a bit of an approximation of papers that Pixar wrote, and we would do the math ourselves and try to get it close to that. But now we have actually the algorithms in Maya working exactly as they've designed it. So currently, 2015 Maya, we have uniform subdivision. I think Daryl has an example on his screen that he can show where the benefits are pretty obvious in terms of performance. And this is a very specific example. The mesh that he has on his screen is our Sven character. You can see there's a lot of solid lines there on the mesh, and that's representing how much creasing there is on the actual mesh. There's a ton of creased edges. And Maya wasn't very good at handling that with its legacy subdivision algorithm. So with OpenSubdiv, you can see the basic difference. So yeah, you can cover that.
You just saw when I hit 3, it said, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because it's going to make a lot of triangles." And I said yes. And I just switched out of using the default, which is obviously set to OSD, OpenSubdiv, and switched back to the classic Maya Catmull-Clark. And if we hit our play on this, you can see that the performance it's not blazingly fast, I would say. So this is what you would get with creased surfaces, and it's important to mention that creases are really the benefit that OpenSubdiv brings, is the ability to take these hard edges and have them play back fast. So if we just switch this over to OpenSubdiv, away from what used to be our default to our new default, and hit play, the performance is drastically faster. So order of magnitude faster with creased edges. So it's just a great piece of technology, and in this case, you can clearly see the benefit of it.
Yeah, so in a case like this, we went from less than 0.1 frames a second to over 30 or 40 frames per second, depending on your graphics card and your setup. So that, yeah, we were seeing something like 300 to 500 times improvement. But again, as Daryl was saying, this is a very specific case. Especially if you're using creased edges or vertices, you will see performance gains like this. In other cases, you might not see too much of a performance improvement, and that's where the work that's ongoing right now lies. Going forward, we're working on something called feature adaptive OpenSubdiv. And what that does is it looks at the features of your mesh, and just for a basic example, a cube, it's going to look at the corners and say, I'm going to treat those subdivisions differently. I'm going to add more detail here adaptively. And something like a planar surface, I don't really need that much detail on that, so I won't add so much there. So it's a smarter algorithm. It will definitely show itself in terms of benefits of performance in the viewport, and really accelerate, or take advantage of your GPU. And so that's work in progress. Daryl could actually post something on his blog eventually that shows you actually, I guess I can call it a beta or a work in progress in Maya 2015. If you install Maya 2015, if you go into viewport 1, you can actually try out feature adaptive OpenSubdiv.
There's an Easter egg in there.
There's an Easter egg in there. And the reason why that is there's so many conditions to make that work. You have to be in viewport 1. You can't be on Mac. So there are too many conditions for us to deliver it as a solid feature that we would stand behind. Like with OpenSubdiv Uniform, it's fully integrated. So if you have multiple color sets, you have multiple UV sets, it's treated just like a standard mesh in Maya. So there's no exceptions there. It's not like a black box. But with feature adaptive, we ran into a few walls, so it's not ready for the limelight, so to speak.
Foundation's there.
Foundation's there, exactly.
And again, I think people have asked the question like, why do you have OpenSubdiv, or what's subdivision surface? And I think the Sven example is actually really good, because a lot of times people wouldn't smooth mesh preview because they want the performance, and things like hands, like Sven's hands on the ground or the feet on the ground. If you don't have the smooth mesh preview, a lot of times you might not get those contact points, and you would only find out when you would render.
Oh, look, it's interpenetrating. Great.
Exactly. So again, the ability for artists to work on target to what they would see in the final render preview really is sort of the benefit, and the fact that we're getting the performance and that we're actually matching the same algorithms as the final renders is really important.
Yeah, it's a bonus. The performance is a bonus, and that's just it. We have these algorithms that are in RenderMan, so if it's what you see in the viewport is what you're going to get in your render. And that's supremely important to us. And like Daryl was saying, we have the solid foundation to build off of. and mental ray as well. Yeah, fully supported by renderers.
So another question that's come in also from Steve was, will bullet rigid bodies be able to collide with deformed geometry?
They can collide with deforming geometry. They can collide. There's also, bullet has the ability to do soft bodies, so it does more than what we've shown in the new feature videos. Yeah, it's in bullet. Every release, it gets a little bit nicer. The integration gets a little bit more Maya-like. It's a really cool solver. I mean, the ability to do thousands of objects with the rigid sets that are there now, it's just so fast to work with compared to the classic rigid solver in Maya, which no one wants to use that. So,
everyone's moved on.
Yeah, people have moved on, and it's nice that we now have a legitimate, solid, production-proven rigid solver in Maya that every release gets more and more Maya-like in its implementation, I would say.
Now, I know one of the questions that I've seen come up in forums a number of times, and we got at least one mention of it in the questions that were submitted to us, was, I guess it's almost not a question so much as a complaint, why doesn't Autodesk get more involved in open source and things like that? And I'd like to throw this to...
Bullet is an open source thing.
Exactly. That's why I kind of wanted to bring it up now, was right off the top, there's one.
Yeah. Sure. So I think Open Subdiv is another example where we worked actively with Pixar. We helped contribute stuff back to the source.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing we want to point out, is it's not like we're just taking open source stuff and putting it in Maya or putting it in any of our products. We're actually contributing.
Yeah, and for example, Limbic, we contribute. We will do. And again, I think everybody has to contribute in their own way. Sometimes Autodesk with things like porting between Mac and Linux, or the boring stuff, or we'll do compiler updates or things like that. A lot of times, one of the interesting things we've been contributing a lot to is the ASIS. ASIS is the new Academy sort of replacement of Cineon, sort of kind of parallel to OpenEXR. We've been contributing to a lot of the performance work there. So, we contribute to PTEC. So there's a lot of different things that behind the scenes we contribute to, and then we get it back in kind. And I think I was talking with some of the companies. So, you take PTEX, OpenEXR, Limbic, OpenVDB, all these different things. I mean, that really, for open source, you have to give the credit to these studios and the people in the studios who fought their bosses. And when the bosses said to them, like, why do I care about this? In some cases, like OpenEXR, they did it without their boss knowing.
It's a good way to get there.
That's going to, and in other cases, like with Open Subdiv, you can imagine that someone like Bill Polson had to fight quite a bit. Bill's been on our stage a couple times, and Bill had some pretty big battles within Pixar to be able to get this technology outside. But again, as one of the grandfathers of the industry, we thought it was amazing that they were able to do that. And again, we're not the most glamorous, maybe we're not contributing in the most glamorous way, but certainly we're very, Autodesk in general is very open to supporting open source.
Now, another question that came in, any updates for the camera sequencer coming? It's been a while. Daryl's like, why is it always
You're the product manager. I hope so.
It's so there's
I think we showed some of that stuff. It's the soft.
So it's not in 2015. We're actually working on something related to the camera sequencer, related to a lot of different the editors within Maya. Again, I think you look at effects in 2015 as sort of, that's probably the biggest focus of this release is effects. And we can say that probably animation is the next big focus for the next release. And a lot of the things that people have been asking us for, we're hoping to address in the coming releases.
Perfect. And another XGen follow-up question from Red Mike. Just to clarify, does XGen have its own hair and fur system, or is it a more efficient way to control Maya and hair and Maya fur?
What do you mean, its own fur and hair system? I'm not quite sure.
He's just trying to figure out, is XGen just driving Maya hair, or is it its own system?
It's not. Yeah. My hair has nothing to do with XGen. Right. It's just its own.
It's its own.
XGen is an arbitrary instancing engine. You can use it to instance splines across a surface to create hair and fur, but you can also do vegetation or buildings or roof tiles or anything, really.
So basically, think of it as a much more generalized concept than anything you would consider
you
our
can use it for hair and fur, but you can also use it for forests or cities.
Also the nucleus tie-in, maybe explain that.
Yeah, and it does tie in with nucleus and hair, in that you can use the guides, or you can create anim wires within XGen that will actually simulate, so you can actually drive the XGen description with hair simulation and collisions and self collisions and all that stuff. You
Perfect. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, moving on. Let's see. Well, one of the questions, we had a number of questions around Bifrost. Somewhere around the API of Bifrost, what's that look like? Does that exist? Others were asking about why Bifrost doesn't seem to be exactly like what Naiad was capable of when we acquired that. So, Chris, where do you want to start there?
Well, we'll start with, because it's all linked together.
Yep.
In the sense that, so when we acquired Naiad, and we also acquired, two really smart people in Marcus Nordestrom and Robert Bridgesden, and we were lucky enough to get Robert to go from being a professor full-time to working for us full-time, which is really great. And, they, as much as everyone wants to make us the bad guys, in this, they felt like there was a lot of things they wanted to do over. When you're a small company, you kind of have to go fast, and there was some pretty interesting, novel research that they wanted to do, especially around things like, and I'm, if you want to get detailed, Marcus has written some great articles with the effects guys. He's been very honest about where he's going in terms of what he wants to do in the product. He's a super passionate guy, and we kind of stand out of his way. Is kind of the way to look at it. So the first release is a generalist release. This is similar to what we have with Nucleus. Mm-hmm. This is a UI, where you're very quickly able to add a simulation, and the videos that Daryl have done have been great to illustrate that, where you're able to quickly get into the solve and quickly go in and also do an end-to-end workflow with Mental Ray, with and or export through Alembic to the third-party package. So the first version, what we focused on really is the interactivity. What does an artist need inside the package, inside the viewport? Maya's old viewport could handle hundreds of thousands of particles. I think that's being generous, maybe. Yep. What Daryl's loading here, I'll let him walk through it in a second, is tens of millions of polygon particles.
Well, this is both for the particles that are part of Bifrost and in particles. Viewport 2.0 just displays them much better. So what we've got here is actually a cache file that I just brought in, and you can see the size of my cache file, 16 gig. That's a GPU cache file, which is awesome. But if you look at this is the file that I just brought in. These guys down here. So it's comprised of a particle file and a voxel file. So this is almost 800 megs of data for one frame. And if we turn on the heads-up display for Bifrost, you'll see that it's basically 10 million points, right? What we're seeing in the viewport right now is capped by default to 1 million, right? But if we just add another 0 to this, you'll see that the detail now is going to pop up in just a second. And you can still see 10 million discrete points inside Maya's viewport. And I'm able to move around it, tumble through it, explore it, play around with the color to really evaluate what that splash is doing. And that, you just couldn't get anywhere close to 10 million points inside of Maya's viewport.
And you couldn't do that in Naiad, in the sense of, this kind of interaction and the ability to, and you see in the videos, change the Maya forces, interact with things, move things around. The Naiad workflow was exporting, right? And it would be, doing the simulation, coming back and seeing that things were wrong or whatever, or someone changes their mind. Imagine that happening. So really what we focused on was trying to have an end-to-end experience within the application and bring all the elements of the solver that people thought were the most important. So we can go online and see the 1 or 2 features that people feel like we're missing. Those are going to be coming very shortly. These were things that just dropped towards the end. Couldn't get it. Things like foam and some of the other aspects. And then the final thing that people keep bringing up is the notion of the node-based workflows and the API. So in the first version, we don't have a node-based workflow. Again, we wanted to target this at generalists. We will have a node-based workflow targeted at TDs in a very short period of time. And then the final step, if you look at that kind of pyramid, is the developers, and giving developers the access to Bifrost at the programmatic, C++ level, and that's a little bit more longer term. So in the first version, you've seen demos where Daryl has been rendering right from the voxels and not meshing, and that's only available through Mental Ray currently. But we're working with the other vendors, Arnold, V-Ray, RenderMan, so that they can, in short order, have access to that same functionality.
Yeah, and I think it's important, moving forward, you can work either in a node-based workflow or you can work in the more archer-centric workflow that we released in the first version. So you'll have your choice, which is really going to be powerful because not everybody wants to dive into the black box of a node, expand it out, and rip the solver apart.
Not
TVs
anyone
want
wants
to
to
do
see
that.
200 nodes and wires.
But if you just need to do something simple, say you're doing, you're not doing a feature film, but you got a commercial you got to crank out in a week. Well, not having to go through a crazy complex node-based workflow might be better for you. So the choice, I think, is really pretty exciting that we're going to have moving forward with Bifrost. It was the first time I've done any effects work, and I was water-based effects work, and I was really I dug it. It was super cool.
Now, another question people were asking was, what was up with the next plugin in Maya? How has the integration of that been going? Because obviously, people tend to pick on Autodesk in general for, let's just buy a plugin, we'll put it in, and then we're done with it. Yeah. So can you give us a little thought on where we are now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's actually going really well in terms of is it being integrated and how's it being integrated. The guys that were involved with creating the next plugin, they still work with us very, very closely. They're brilliant guys, very focused on artist workflows. And so, we added that next plugin, now called the Modeling Toolkit, in Maya 2014. And then anyone who picked up the extension can realize that a few of those things started bleeding into Maya's tools, like the selection and the base core tools in Maya. You start seeing a bit of the integration happen. The reason why we're not jumping on and just saying, let's remove the duality of the context, let's remove all the redundancies right away, is that we want to do it properly. We have this opportunity to work with these guys who have a lot of ideas that we want to explore. So we're taking it slowly, carefully, and we want to make sure that any changes we make to very core functionalities like the select tool or the transform tools in Maya, we do with all the right changes, and we don't just rush it and try to remove all the redundancies, because that could have taken us 3 or 4 months of work. But we're looking at this as more of a phased approach. So in Maya 2015, you're going to see as one example of many, many examples of integration work that we've done, the multi-cut tool. We have several ways to cut a poly in Maya. We have the cut faces tool, we have interactive split, we have the split polygon tool, which is essentially the same thing as the interactive split, but with additional features that were missing in that tool. Then we added the multi-cut tool. So there's so many tools that do essentially the same thing, just in different ways, and we want to remove that kind of thing and have a more streamlined approach to modeling, that you have one tool that's almost like a Swiss Army knife for cutting, and that's essentially what we're delivering in 2015, is the multi-cut tool. We've added the cut faces tool functionality to it. Insert edge loop is in there. And we've removed the interactive split tool. We removed the split polygon tool. And so that might come as a shock that we've started to remove tools that maybe some of you have leaned on using because the interactive split tool wasn't cutting polys the way you liked it, like 5 or 6 sided face polys weren't being cut properly. So we took a good majority, a good chunk of the year to look at what's the best way we can approach cutting polys. And we put all that work into the multi-cut tool. It's a fascinating tool. You enter it, you can spend a long time just using that tool. So we decided this is now completely redundant with any of the other tool offerings with interactive split and split poly, so we just removed them, and now we have that one tool. And we want to keep doing that with things like extrude and bevel, and just have one experience that works and that is completely streamlined. So I'd say in the very near future, we should be finished the integration work. And by finished, I mean you won't have to turn on and off the modeling toolkit. You wouldn't have to know if it's on or off when you're using your tools. And just have a more consistent, streamlined experience. And that's coming, and we are dedicated to finishing that work. We just want to explore a lot of the possibilities now that we still have these guys on board with us, and we can pick their brains for some really interesting features that we can keep adding to the software.
Perfect. Now, returning to Bullet. Daryl, get ready. Just returning to this, for Bullet, in Maya 2014, it doesn't seem to collide accurately with geometry with change deformations. When you say it does, do you mean that there are new improvements to this in 2015, or is it just still the general what was in 2014?
Yeah, for the collisions, it's what's in 2014. I was specifically talking about like the soft body and it colliding with its own deforming entities that were deemed softs.
Gotcha. All right, so now continuing along here. One of the questions that came up was asking about how we handle things like research and innovation inside of the teams. Where are we going there? Is there any really cool kind of research going on that we can talk about?
So we'll do it in two parts. One part is we'll talk about in general, and then I'll let Michael describe how things, GVB, something like that kind of comes out, and how that because research is really that, like you don't know what you're going to get out of it. So I think people if everyone wants to see what Autodesk does in terms of pure research, just search Autodesk research. There's a team that came over from Alias. It's been supplemented by a lot of researchers since then. There's a lot of visiting academics that go through Toronto and San Francisco, and they will research everything and everything from user interaction to design algorithms to there's been some interesting things.
Yeah, to give you an idea, I spent a good year with a bunch of sensors scattered all over my office area that just tracked how and when I used my office and the resources of the office, and they did it to a whole bunch of cubes, and you're just like, what are these for?
And they're trying to, there's a parametric human project where they're scanning bones and things like that. So that's pure research.
Yep.
That's things that, the other pure research project we were involved in was Molecular Maya or DNA Maya. It was in the Wired magazine, I think about 3 months ago, where we were involved with researchers doing molecular, assemblies to do combat cancer and stuff, really pretty much above any one of us. We were there to make the little blobby guys look cool.
Yep.
That's pure research. Someone like a Robert Bridgesden. Robert Bridgesden is the academic Yostam.
Mm-hmm.
These are people, Yostam doing nucleus and Robert doing Bifrost. These are people that are doing pure research into, how do you make certain things work within a framework and things like that. So those are our pure researchers. And I think in terms of innovation, I think the interesting thing is you have to plan for innovation. I know it sounds crazy, but you have to give people the time to do research. You have to give people the time
make
to
mistakes.
Make mistakes. And so one of the interesting stories I'll talk about was we gave some time to one of the engineers, and they came up with the Geodesic Voxel binding. I'll let Michael describe kind of what it does and how it helps out and some of the thoughts behind that process.
With the Geodesic voxel binding, what it does is actually analyzes the mesh, and it breaks it down into like cubes essentially, and it actually within those cubes it actually works out the bind to the skeleton underneath, and you can change the resolution of that. I think the default is like 1024. But right now there's no actual visualization in Maya when you're doing the binding, but there is a tool that the developers have that can show what the binding is actually doing, and there's some thought going into maybe exposing that to the users as well. Because what it does is that you don't have to have a watertight mesh to do the binding on, and you can actually use a mesh with multiple pieces, and you can bind to one skeleton with multiple pieces, and it works. And it's really quick as well. It's a lot faster than the old bind as well, because that could take several minutes to do a simple bind, a smooth bind. But with the voxel binding, it's actually quite quick. It's multi-threaded, so it works really fast. And again, you don't have to have a joined mesh. You don't have to have a combined mesh. You can just have multiple meshes, and you can just bind to that, and you can set the resolution that you need. And the default bind without any tweaking whatsoever you get out of it is really good. You get some really nice volume preservation in the joints, like the knees and the elbows and the shoulders work really well, a lot better than the old smooth bind, because you'd get areas where, like, if the thighs were a bad area because they'd cross over, so one leg would influence the other leg, but with the voxel binding, you're going to get like a clean bind per leg. You don't have to go in, and there's a lot less tweaking needed after the bind to paint the weight maps to actually make them not interfere with each other across the various joints. So it is a lot better.
And I think, again, to the point of innovation, the problem of binding has been around a long time. We've had many methods, and this was a developer, in that process of doing some research. The problem's been there. They came up with a novel approach using voxels to solve this.
Showed it as a SIGGRAPH paper, I think.
Showed it as a SIGGRAPH paper, and again, it was, again, something like that 10 years ago, calculating voxels for this would have taken
forever.
And so again, it's kind of like research and innovation. Sometimes the technology changes, or sometimes the hardware changes. So the fact that you could do this on pretty much everyone's computer in under a minute or two, whereas 10 years ago it would have taken 30, 40 minutes, is that notion of innovation and research. So we have a lot of teams that spend time doing research, and again, sometimes you hit and sometimes you don't. So I think you have to take that risk, and I think we do a fair mix of dealing with the base things, where we're trying to fix the things that you
how do we
guys
just
use
make
every
this
day.
better?
Working with open source because there's innovation there, and we do our own investment in innovation and our research in our own sites.
Yeah, there's never anything easy about an innovation. You keep trying things until something works. All right, so another thing that was asked about earlier was how we work with plugin partners. I'm not exactly sure what the intent of the question was, but I guess it's...
well, I think our customers use a lot of plugins.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that
it's obviously something we count on.
And so I think we and a lot of times people will not upgrade their version of the software until their plugin that they use every day is available. I know V-Ray is
a common one for that.
Is a common one for that, and so we have a program that we run. It's a separate to the beta program. So there's the beta program, which we always invite anyone on these chats or anyone else who wants to take part in beta to help us out developing the software. But there's a special beta for our plugin partners because they obviously have different needs and they need to understand what changes we've made to APIs. They need support from developers. So we have a separate beta for those guys. Usually it's between 5 and 10 of the core plugin developers that we bring on. We also have a beta for things like FBX.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of companies like Unity, Unreal, that rely on FBX. So we have a beta with them where we make changes so that when 2015 comes out, Maya 2015 will work with Unity 5.0 hopefully. And again, your V-Ray 3.0, which oddly enough is coming out around this time.
Exactly.
Funny how that works.
Timing.
Is again, so we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years trying to be way more open with our plugin partners so that again, when you take the leap on upgrading your new version or you get the new version in, you guys can get all of your plugins and all of your FBX workflows work.
Don't want to leave you suddenly hanging.
Well, no, you just won't upgrade.
Yes, exactly.
That's pretty simple.
It's like, I'm sorry, I just can't do that now.
Yeah.
So, a question online. So, as an outside user, I saw Nucleus as something really good in Maya, being a unified framework. Now, with Bullet and Bifrost, it seems like you're fighting a lot of fronts in one go. Will we be seeing a similar approach in the future to unifying these technologies, or opting to one in particular?
So, I think the nucleus, like everything else, you have an intention, and then
and then reality sets in.
And then reality sets in. So I think there was another question in there about N rigids and things like that.
Yeah, I've got
so
one.
I think what we've learned from Nucleus. Nucleus is used very heavily in feature film for cloth and hair. Mm-hmm. And we get a lot of feedback on, the scalability of the hair, the cloth, a lot of the workflows for painting. And so it's kind of settled itself in. To give you guys an idea, a company like Disney would probably have about 60 to 70 solvers in-house, from anything from rigid bodies. They'll say, I have Bullet, but then they'll have 6 or 7 other ones.
Uniquely tweaked,
or they'll just throw it. They'll just, they'll have a sim and they'll just throw something at it. And some sims will do better than others. Long hair, short hair. These are all things that, in general, the fact that there's, no one solver to rule them all when it comes to a high-end framework. So I think when it comes down to things like games, you've seen PhysX do quite well. There's a great PhysX plugin for Maya. I think when it comes into the higher-end effects and getting the quality that you need, it was very clear that, Bifrost, kind of son of Naiad, needed its own framework. Bullet rigid bodies is something that's super mature. And paired up with the work of Nucleus, and the fact that you can now do Olympic caching for every one of those. That's more of the workflow that we're seeing in the mid to high range studios, where these complex caching things, they're kind of brought out, and even in things like Houdini, where they're showing things kind of coming together. In most cases, they even cache out at various steps in the pipeline. So in an ideal world, at one point there would be one solver to rule the wall in terms of going back to innovation, right?
Exactly.
But the reality is today that most people use a variety of solvers strung together, and you know, using caching to kind of pair them up.
Right. So another question that came in was asking, taking it down to something a little more basic, is are custom locator shapes supported in Viewpoint 2 in Maya 2015?
Yeah. I mean, that's the plugin shape does that. That's XGen is a perfect example. Bifrost is another example of custom displays happening in Viewport 2. So yeah, there's hooks for it.
So let's see what else we've got down here. We've used a few offsite solutions to render jobs and even lately some cloud-based ones which have worked well. Are you planning on offering something built into Maya anytime soon? There's another on-the-line kind of question.
Sure. First of all, technically the cloud-based solutions for Maya are against the EULA, but hey,
yes,
Sean and I are busy guys, so we're not going to be chasing down all these people. But again, we are seeing that, you know, the bandwidth required to put jobs up and down. Again, going back to innovation, it's starting to get pretty amazing how fast some of this bandwidth up and down is. We have some pilots that we've been running. You know, the service that, you know, the Autodesk service that we're running, where you're able to run a full running instance of Maya on these Amazon instances that now have graphics cards. You know, we were doing demonstrations last month on a laptop, demonstrating Maya through a web browser that was running a K5000 and running scenes in the viewer that we couldn't even load on the laptop. Yep. So again, you know, a lot of the barriers that are in hindering cloud-based workflows are starting to come down. So we're doing a lot of research. We have Character Generator, which we just launched. So that's a cloud-based service for doing you know, character creation. And the thing underneath the hood, which is interesting, is that that's actually Maya underneath the hood. So the UI actually comes through. It's an HTML5 UI, allowing you to set up all the character. And when you hit process, it actually then drives a Maya instance to create the character or the output FBX or HIK file. So I think, you know, we're helping out companies like Zinc. You know, we're supporting them. We're understanding all the different services that are available, because I think the key is that, you know, even if Autodesk comes out with a service, there will always be local things that are faster. There will always be some private local network, you know, like SohoNet in London, that will want to have specific things. So what we are doing is making sure that Maya can run in all these different places and going through these different use cases, so that whether it's a service that's going to be offered by us, not saying that we will or won't, but you know, that'll work. You can go to rendering.autodesk.com and see our rendering service from Autodesk today. So there's a lot of work going in there. And again, we want to support partners that want to do something like that too.
Now I think at this point I want to put Daryl on the spot a little bit and just kind of throw it to him. If you had to pick a couple things, what are the things that you consider your most favorite bits that have come with this release?
It's hard to choose one, honestly.
It's been a good release for you. You've been very happy with this.
Yeah. Well, I think every part of the code got touched. You know, there's new stuff in rendering. There's new stuff in effects. Modeling's got a lot of love. The UV layout stuff. I thought I was going to stop doing UVs when PTEX came around. Still have to do them.
Yeah.
And now there's some great new UV tools that Michael was involved with, and that's just huge. I did a day of UV layout on that Sven spaceship, and I was thankful for the new tools, because it would have been more than a day. So is there
anything you can do to just quickly show a little bit of the UV stuff?
I'll have to pull up Sven's head here.
Do you want to give your overview of what we did in UVs while Daryl brings up some stuff?
One of the things we worked on the UV editor was to actually give more feedback to the users on what the optimization of the UVs is like in the UV editor, because there's other packages that do like interactive feedback with the UVs, so you can see whether the UVs are being stretched or compressed in texture space. So one of the things we added a shading mode to the UV editor to actually give feedback on that, so you can actually optimize the UVs and see what they're actually doing. And we also added a unfold 3D algorithm, which is really, really good. I mean, this is Daryl's right now. He's just doing a default projection on Sven's head, and you can see there's lots of overlaps and there's lots of degeneracy in there, and it's not going to be a very good projection. That's not something you'd want in a UV layout. But with the Unfold 3D algorithm, you can optimize that, and you can get a really nice layout really quickly with very minimal effort after the fact to actually clean it out. And that's one of the reasons why I put this Unfold 3D algorithm in there, because it's just way better. And there you go. And
especially areas around the eyes.
That's quite an extreme one. That's actually done a lot of unfolding.
Yeah,
the settings were quite. What were the settings on?
I don't know.
No, it's not too bad. But that was just a really bad projection. So if you got a planar projection on a face set on the facial area, you could get a really clean.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem was that when I did that, I just did a loop select, and it selected all the way around.
His face right down the middle.
I only wanted to split his head halfway. Let's undo that.
Yeah, I'd probably do a planar projection on the front of his face and then just show that.
Okay.
Just do a face selection on that. And when he's done that, we can show you the compression shader as well and see what happens with that.
So again, this is really us taking the time to go back on the things that we know that pretty much every single one of you do every single day.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in modeling and Weta Digital, and you'd spend like a month or 2 months building an asset, and then you'd spend another month doing the UVs on that asset. So, and because the UV tools in Maya were so, well...
insufficient to that particular task?
Yeah. We'd have to go to outside tools to actually do the UV mapping, and then just bring that back into Maya and just send it onto Shade and Paint. But these tools that we've added now are a big step in the right direction, because they just make it so much easier to get a good, clean UV layout. And we've added tiling support has been upgraded a lot in the UV editor as well. And we've got a lot of new features in where they're nudging and stuff, so you can nudge from tile to tile, and you can display the textures in the tiles in the UV editor as well. So yeah, this is just a simple planar projection.
Oops. It's not liking it. Oh.
That's the projection.
Wrong window.
Wrong window. I thought I had the UV unfold, or the UV. I thought I had it up, but it was the other one. So
apply. And it snapped it to the. There you go.
Yeah, we are.
And there it is.
And there you go.
There it is. And this guy's kind of weird too, right? Because he's got like his inside of his mouth is in there, and he's got eye sockets in there. So, but it still does a really solid job.
I mean, if you put the shaded mode on as well, the compression shader.
Where's that at?
This one. No, the other one. There you go. That's the compression shader. So the red areas are being stretched, and the blue areas are being compressed, and the white areas are optimal. So inside the mouth, that's inside the mouth. So it's been stretched inside the mouth, but it doesn't really important. But you can go in with soft select, and you can update that, so you can make a selection on those, and then do a scale. I think your selection is quite big.
Yeah, let's do that.
And you can see it's updating in real time, so you can. The white is optimal, so if you were getting white areas, your texture's being optimized. I mean, if you see in the 3D viewport, you can see actually his facial area is actually pretty optimal. There's a little bit of stretching on his nose, and a little bit on his chin, but otherwise it's a pretty good clean projection on that. Yeah, and then they've got nudge tools as well, just off the side of this. You can open the window.
All right, let's dive in. I've got a few more questions that have shown up here while they're fiddling around with those.
The step's pretty big on that.
So there was a question in Naiad. Will Naiad be used? Well, not Naiad anymore. Now Bifrost be used only for liquid simulations, or is it a more general particle engine? Can we use expressions, instancing, etc.?
So yeah, so the first version is liquids. When we showed it at SIGGRAPH, we showed Aero, which would be smoke and flame. Those are other things that it's capable of, and it is basically a big particle thing underneath. So again, first version is liquids, but every question that you ask there is something that's in the architecture, right?
It's possible.
So it's possible, and something that Marcus has been very. Again, you just have to go if you want to know what Marcus wants. It's in the effects guide articles that he's very bullish about everything you guys have written in the forums. He will not stop until it's all done. So.
And then we have a series of questions on asking if there was anything new to Mental Ray in this round.
Yeah, definitely. So the Mila shaders are there, which is probably the big thing. Progressive rendering's there. There's some nice little IBL node now has the ability to add light to the scene without using Final Gather. So there's a few significant things that really will, I think.
And PTEX support.
PTEX support, yeah. Multi-tile support.
Multi-tile support that Michael mentioned, and a lot stronger limbic support. So we work with Mental Ray quite a bit, actually, trying to, it's okay. Again, people would use V-Ray and Arnold and all these things, but they shouldn't have to pay for a render for really basic things that people expect that are now common workflows.
Exactly.
Like PTEX and UDIM and the limbic. So these were things that we talked to Mental Ray about. And at the same time, as Daryl said, they went out and they approved a lot of the things that were there. And some of the things like Mila and Progressive may have been in Mental Ray in the past, but now that they're exposed in Maya, yeah.
And actually, to lead into that, another question was if someone could comment on the relationship with NVIDIA, and in particular to the Mental Ray side of things.
Well, we were in GTC, so I had a choice this week, which was to stay here or go to GTC, which is the graphic tech conference that NVIDIA is running. If you looked outside, you could see outside it's snowing here. I don't know if I made the right choice,
oh, yeah.
but definitely, the NVIDIA guys. We basically they had a keynote for Mental Ray. We were there. Some of the people that work on my team were there, so. Certainly, NVIDIA helped us out with Bifrost. They helped us out with other things. The display of Maya, all the Viewport 2 stuff. We have a great relationship with NVIDIA and AMD as well on that front. And in terms of Mental Ray, actually, the Mental Ray guys will be in Montreal next week. So on an annual basis, they come to Montreal. We met last year. We went over all of these things. The product designers, product specialists kind of descend on Montreal for Max and Maya. And we go over what we think is the next big set of items that we want to tackle. And then they have dedicated development for us. And so right now, again, I think if you look at the status of any relationship, it's the proof is in the pudding, right? Yep. So I do believe that 2015 is a good, solid Mental Ray release for Maya.
Now we had another question here. NURBS in Maya are screaming for an update. Can we expect something soon to be done about that? An overhaul, maybe? To the modeling guy.
We're always looking at modeling in general. So whether that's Subdivs, polygons or NURBS, we're especially taking care of bugs and just enhancing the tools that already exist in Maya. Is there anything new in terms of NURBS in Maya 2015? No. Aside from, like I was saying, some enhancements and some bug fixes. Are we looking at future workflows that involve NURBS and how they interact with polys and those types of workflows? Yes, that's always on the table. And going forward, we're always trying to find the best surface types and the best tools to get the job done. So that is.
Talk about T-splines if you want.
You can if you want. Yeah, I mean T-splines is something that is obviously popular at Autodesk, and we want to be looking at that sort of thing and seeing if that solves any of the problems that we're trying to solve with subdividing surfaces. So yeah, I mean that's on the table as much as everything else that we're looking at.
Yeah, so I mean again, it comes down to what do you want to do with those NURBS?
Exactly.
So again, T-Splines was a company we purchased a couple years ago. Maya has sort of a tradition of being part of the automotive workflows with the alias side of things. So we're at a lot of the car makers. A lot of them use Maya. So the interesting thing is we're seeing a lot of them move to subdivision workflows, polygon workflows for car concept design. So we're having these conversations where they're moving away from NURBS, not in surfacing, not in when you actually want the car to be built and function and all the real world stuff. But definitely in the concept design, we're seeing a move away from NURBS.
Yeah, they don't feel they need the mathematically perfect surface.
And that's where things like retopology are coming in, where reality capture. So what we're seeing, and again, why we're not saying woohoo on NURBS is because we're seeing a lot more capture techniques where polygon soups are coming in, or a lot more people using these hybrid T-spline techniques. And then later, when they need the mathematical precision, they'll use retopology tools, or in some cases, they will rebuild the car bit by bit, chunk by chunk to get that mathematical precision. But they feel like the freedom that they have in the concept phases with subds and polygons is worth it.
Nothing like a little bit more fluidity to working with things. Now, another question that came in here was referencing back to the IBL node. Does NHair, Maya Paint Effects, Maya Fur, etc. play well with the IBL node?
Haven't tried it.
To be determined.
Actually, I tried it, but I don't think I had the NHair in it, or it was XGen hair, because I'm not using NHair on the character.
Right.
XGen doesn't really support in the viewport, XGen doesn't really support the IBL.
I'll make a furry sphere. We'll see real fast what happens.
Oh,
Circle back to me in 2 minutes.
Circle back. Okay.
It'll be black.
The next question will probably be to you too. So, you know. Are there any plans to introduce more shattering tools in Maya using Voronoi techniques or other approaches? See, I told you.
I mean, there's plugins out there. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. There's a new one that's C++ compiled, so it's a little bit faster. Yeah. We don't have an out-of-the-box solution. We don't have. Creative Cow has a variety of them. There's some great ones in Max. The one that Louis worked on or added to worked really well, which is what I actually used for the Maya one for the new feature video. So there's lots of ways of doing it, but no out-of-the-box solution. We're looking at it though. I know I've had conversations with some of the other designers about it. So.
Let's see what else we got. Scene assembly had a very good initial introduction, but is still limiting for pipelines at the moment. Are there plans to further develop it?
Yes. So scene assembly was scene assembly. Just to everyone, we released it, and it went into productions at places like DreamWorks and actually places like 343. It went into a lot of heavy places, and
people are going to hammer on you.
Crap out of it. This is a low level. Very binary, it works or doesn't work. So we had a lot of, this year was the year of making sure that everything that we've built works. One of the things that we feel like is really necessary for us to move scene assembly forward is having a format that we can build upon. So maybe somebody can go online and Google Pixar, or maybe I'll get Sean to do it after, is the Pixar USD format. So Pixar has a proposal, has a first pass. They've released some of the documentation, some of the basics behind what they use internally. They call it USD. Think of it as Alembic is sort of a geometry cache format. This is a higher level thing that will actually capture things like edits, things like shot specific. So you might have this room, which is a bunch of reference in files. And then if we only have one camera in this sequence, but if I was to say cut and then there was another camera over there, in many cases, a lot of these bigger pipelines, they'll have shot-specific edits. So this glass might be here in this camera, but it might be over here in the second camera, but you don't want to change all the original files. You just want to have a small edit. We might have, an example would be Buzz Lightyear having a bunch of setups, and then one with wings, one without wings. So these are the types of things you want to have in a scene assembly-like language. So what we have is an API that allows bigger studios who already have these formats, who have already been doing this for years, allows them to do it. Our big focus this year is to bring that to everybody else, to have an out-of-the-box workflow. We're working with the Shotgun guys quite heavily on scene assembly, so we have some prototypes that we're working on. So that you'd be able to load in shots. They did a great demo last week of Perforce, where they were showing that kind of workflow. And we want to have the same thing with scene assembly, where you'd be able to load a shot. It would only load in what's required. You'd be able to make the changes. And then all of that work of checking back all of those things would be done through something like Shotgun with a proper scene file. And the key with the scene file for us is that scene file lives outside of Maya.
Right.
And so if we want to share that scene file, why it's called Universal, they have a plugin if it needs to work with Houdini, if it needs to work with Katana, if it needs to work with a game engine, we would be able to have a format that is owned by nobody. And again,
it's really just a big pointer file with basic information. And
again, the whole key is that you don't want to have to load a whole big Maya file inside of Maya just to find a little piece of information. If you can have a lightweight XML, JSON, or whatever whatever you guys want to build, that's separate from Maya, that you can query separate from Maya. That's the direction that we want to take. So scene assembly, We had all the intentions to have a bunch of progress this year, but a lot of the progress was related to ensuring that the features that we had put in 2014 stood the test of, they were battle tested, as they say.
So Daryl's just giving me the thumbs up that he has something in his viewports as we speak.
Yeah,
so let's pull that up. This is our go away piece because we're at the end of our time.
It's an ugly furry ball, but
it's an ugly furry ball.
I've used the new emit light functionality on the IBL node,
thing.
and you can obviously see that we're getting the lighting. There's no lights in the scene, so it's getting lit from that IBL node.
So there we are. We have proof that IBL is playing.
Never tried it. Apparently it works. Somebody's doing their job.
So we'll end this particular session on an up note then. We've discovered something else that works. So I'd like to thank you all for tuning in once again. We've run out of time. So if you have more questions you'd like to ask, especially if it's along more of the tips and tricks, techniques kind of route, please tune in tomorrow. And if I double check to make sure I say the right time, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have the Maya tips and tricks session. For anyone interested, coming up right after this in another half hour, we're going to have the Mudbox tips and tricks session. And then before the Maya session tomorrow, we'll have the 3ds Max tips and tricks session. So you have lots of choices for tips and tricks and techniques. We even have outside customers that we've brought in to add to the tips and techniques that we have. So check those out. Hope everyone got what they wanted out of this session. And again, thank you very much.